It sounded to me like they were some kind of a jointure. She said they help each other out. If one didn't have this part for the car, or that part of the car, and they would share and get along. That's what the girl's impression was of how the businesses were run. One other thing I found interesting, and this is really not the gas station, but I just thought it's too interesting not to pass along, is that they said their dad, before he got in the gas station business, he sold and delivered Studebaker cars. Yeah, well, that didn't sound like that big a deal to me, you know, selling cars. Well, they said he would take orders, and when he got so many orders, he would go out to Detroit with his wife and any guys that worked for him, I guess, and they would take like a cavalcade of three or four cars out. And one time he had orders for 9 or 10 Studebakers. So they drove out there, and these guys that were with him and worked with drove the cars back to Slatington. And I just thought, you know, when we think of today's modern day of, you know, you can buy a car on the internet right now, but here they had to go out there, drive the cars right back again. That's my story on the lower section, that corner. Next to them should be a photo of Dr. Swingle's home. Prior to that, it was David Williams that built it. And his daughter, Cinderella Roseberry, lived there till the 40s or something like that. The first doctor I could find that was in that house, who used that house as his office, was a Dr. William Morgan, who was there for a short time from the late 1940s to the early 1950s. But then Dr. Kenneth Swingle took over. Do we have a photo of, there he is. It was Dr. Kenneth Swingle. From 1952 to 1977. So he had a fairly long stint there. When I was researching him, I thought, I wonder whatever happened to his daughter Kathleen. Kathleen was in my class in 6th and 7th and 8th grade. Then she disappeared. Well, upon research, I should have known this because other classmates knew it, but I just didn't. She went out to Hamburg, Blue Mountain Academy, which was associated with, I think it was a Seventh-day Adventist denomination, and that's where she finished school and high school out there and went on to college and got married. And so I talked to her, and she was really nice in that. Of course, the thing that is, if you're not into history, genealogy, and someone like that approaches you, how did you find me? You know, I thought I was well hidden out here, but and you're not hidden when on the internet. Let me tell you, you're not hidden. Okay, the next building, which was a side of David Wood, you may have known growing up as the Messinger home. But prior to the Messingers, incidentally, the Messingers didn't have businesses in town, but they were very active in the supervision and leadership of the sand quarry up outside of Palmerton. But that's not who was in there. In there was an ice cream confectioner and restaurant. In the 1900 census, Irwin and Jenny Jones operated an ice cream confectionery, and according to her obituary, they operated a restaurant here also. I sort of thought too that I read where that was used as an apartment building at one time. There's a lot of rooms in the house, a lot of rooms. So I called some people that lived downtown. I knew Candace lived there. She could share some stuff. Then I thought of Jimmy Evans. So I called Jimmy Evans and what he remembered growing up down there, because he is 2 years or so older than me, and I didn't grow up there, so he would remember that. Well, he said, I remember the Berkshire train coming in. Oh, I said, my wife's writing a book about the Berkshire. Oh, that's interesting. He said he remembers it coming in behind at the quarry, at the cave, down to the station. And then I said, what else do you know about that area? And I don't know, he's here. Do you want to tell us that story so I don't mess it up?
No, you're doing fine, Tim.
I'm sure I'm going to mess it up. But anyway, Jimmy said this struck a good chord with me, because he said he delivered the grit. So did I. But he said he was riding, I know, he wanted a new bike, or wanted a bike, and he was saving his money, and he was still short. And I think he said an aunt came in for a funeral, some family member passed away, and somehow she must have found out through Jimmy's parents that what's going on, and she ended up by giving Jimmy the balance he needed to buy a bike. So he went to Messinger's, but Messinger's wasn't on Candace's side of the street. Messinger, Jim tells me, had a shop in the back of that home where he sold bikes at the time. I imagine this has got to be early 50s, Jim, or what?
Yeah, I got that bike in, I think, 1953. Yeah. It was a new English 3-speed the skinny tire. And
skinny tire. We called them English bikes when I was growing up.
Ross, I think, maybe.
Ross, big one. They were in Allentown. I always said, yeah.
Well, yeah, he had a nice bicycle shop in the back behind the house.
So but the punchline here, I thought was this is all interesting, but I thought the punchline here was that he was riding it one time, I guess delivering papers up on 4th Street?
Correct.
Up on 4th Street, uptown. Now, what the downtown boy was doing, delivering grit up there, he was taking away somebody else's job, you know that. He should have stayed downtown, But anyway, he told me he rolled the bike or crashed the bike or something, and he had to push it down the hill to get home. And he took it back to Messinger. And he said, how much is it going to cost to fix this? And he says that Cliff Messinger said, you bought it here, we fix it here. No charge. Man, come on. Where are those days, huh? But I just thought that was a remarkable story. I'm done. Questions? Any? Okay, I will be turning the rest of the Main Street over to Michael.
You can go back. All right, so we're gonna keep going up Main Street. So I'm sure everyone's seen this house before, right? What's the Slatington's famous business that's to the left of that? Hallman's. So we're gonna start by talking a little bit about Hallman's and today, and then we're gonna work a little bit backwards. So Hallman's service station is located at 230 and 232 Main Street. Hallman's service station has served the greater Slatington community since 1939. A mechanic shop and gasoline station were established there by Wilbert Lips Hankey. He then passed it on to his son-in-law, Bup Hallman, in 1964, and then it was passed on to Bup's son, Russ, in 1976. Russ Jr. owns the business today. But before the location was used as a service station, the building looked like that, what you see there. Very much different from what we see today. There was a building, it was right on Main Street, and it had a dry goods and grocery store, the same ice cream and confectioner shop and restaurant that Tim talked about. I think it moved right next door. A restaurant and a general merchandise store. These are some of the people that own those businesses at the location. Tim talked about Irwin Jones. That was when it was an ice cream and confectioner shop. And then by 1910, it doubled as a restaurant. Jones's obituary suggested that he had the business as early as 1889. By 1920, a gentleman by the name of Edward T. Anthony owned the building, and he operated a restaurant there. In 1927, Irvin Daubert converted the building from a restaurant into a general merchandise store. And at that time, he actually listed the soda fountain from the restaurant for sale in the local newspapers. He died in 1936, and his estate sold the property to Wilbert Hankey, who established the gas and service station that we know as Hallman's today. One little interesting tidbit that I thought was interesting. The location was not only known as a business, but also had an upstairs apartment. And based on what I found in the 1950 census records, the family of Joseph Gallio lived there. So I think we can move through a couple of slides and see what else we got there. Then it changed to Sunoco service station. That's Lip standing in front of the station. Some of these pictures are from our 2014 book. Next, if we keep moving up, we now have what is today the beer distributor. Well, not everyone knows this, especially the younger generation, but before it was a beer distributor, there was a residence that was there. But we'll talk again about the beer distributor first. Since 1967, based on what I found, a beer distributor has been located at 234 and 236 Main Street. The property was first owned by Oscar Van Norman, who moved his beverage distribution business from the old grist mill at the bottom of the Main Street Bridge to this location in 1967. The business has known a bunch of different names over the years, and I'm going to list some of them. It was known as Pete's Beverages from 81 to 85, Sportsman's Beverages 85-86, TJ Beverages 86 to 88, Pops from 91 to 2007, Brooksy's from 2007 to 2021, and it's currently known as Barrels of Fun. Prior to 1967, there was a 2.5-story brick building that was located there. And there were two residences in that brick building, 234 and 236 Main Street. 234 Main Street went through a number of different owners over the years. Victor Rhinesmith in 1920, Robert Walper lived there in 1930, and Ray Ramaley in 1940 and 1950. Ray Ramaley was a coal dealer in Slatington, and he conducted his business there. The other half of the home, though, 236, was owned by the Holben family from at least 1910 through 1964, and we can see a picture of their residence there. The property was first owned by Dr. Monroe Holben, who was a physician in Slatington by 1880. When he died in 1919, his son, Dr. Malcolm Holben, took over the practice. He retired from practicing medicine in 1957, ending at least a 77-year stretch where a Dr. Holben served the greater Slatington community. I'm sure some of our older folks that are in here remember the younger Dr. Holben. After Dr. Malcolm Holben's death, the property was purchased by Charles and Marlene Hankel, and then a year later in 1965 was when Oscar Van Norman purchased the property, and within 2 years the brick structure was demolished and he constructed the drive-through beer distributorship. Lastly, we have Job Connection Services, is where it is at 246 and 248 Main Street. And it's a little building right now, but it was a residence before that and conducted a variety of businesses as well. The current one-story building was built in 1984, and since 1984, some of the following businesses were there. Roger C. Mance Appliance, Miller and Henninger Building Contractors. Joe Babiak had his Prudential Insurance there before he moved uptown. Java on Main, and then currently Job Connection Services. Before 1984, the building that was there was a 3-story structure, and based on when I was asking around our committee members, it sounded like that was where the old town hall was. 246 was a tinware and plumbing business as early as 1896 through at least 1948. We have a receipt from George Warner displayed there, but Edwin Osler was the one who owned the business through his death in 1919, and then George Warner operated the business. Plumbing and tinware, they kind of came, they did all the hookups and everything, and they also sold stoves. George Warner continued the business there until 1948. By 1950, there were 2 apartments, one on the first floor, and one on the upstairs. The upstairs apartment was rented by the David Edwards family, and the downstairs apartment was rented by Delbert Miller and his family. The other half of the building, 248 Main Street, was the location of a bakery. And that business started at least in 1896 and continued at least through 1930. And here are some of the people that owned that bakery business. G.M. Huber, E.H. Brown, Ava Bailey, and Eugene Neese. Just like the other half of the building, by 1950, there was an upstairs apartment and a downstairs apartment. At that time, the upstairs apartment belonged to Archie Smith, and the downstairs apartment belonged to Marty Gusick. In the late 1920s, the location became a retail business, and it remained through at least 1934. George Warner, Earl Class, and Fred Sell operated retail businesses there. It seemed like there was a lot of back and forth going on across the street. Candace talked a little bit earlier about Benninger's Antiques. She also talked about George Warner and his business. There was evidence that he was on one side, both of those businesses were on one side, and then went to the other at one point in time. So based on what I found, around 1953, Benninger's Antiques was there and stayed there until about 1959. Florence Roberts owned the property during the 60s, and then she sold it to Oscar Van Norman in 1969. Tried to research when they demolished the building, really couldn't find out. Oscar Van Norman passed away in 1983, and it's pretty possible that it remained in his estate until he died. Then after he died, it was demolished to build the current 1-story building in 1984. So that's what I have through that part of Main Street. Kelly's going to be up next, and she's going to talk about the remaining part up to Center Street, which is where Kramer's Shoe Store and Martha's Hat Shop was.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see so many people here today. I know we really had a lot of competing events today, so I'm really happy to see that we have such a good crowd. As Mike said, I'll be talking about the Kramer's Shoe Store and Martha's Hat Shop. Those buildings, 2 were razed, and I could not figure out when that occurred. You would have thought it would have been some sort of newspaper article, but there was just nothing to indicate when that occurred. So for Kramer's Shoe Store, that was located at 256 Main Street. I'm guessing it was somewhere between starting in 1909 through 1956. It sounds like it was located downtown in that area. And then it had eventually moved uptown. The business proprietors were Israel Kramer and Minnie Kramer, and they actually started that out as a tailor company. And their daughter, they had a daughter Florence, and they also had 4 sons, and those 4 sons had eventually introduced shoes to that store, and it eventually became exclusively a shoe store. Florence got married to Morris Jaffe, and they took over running the store. I found a really nice newspaper article that was published in the Morning Call, and this was published in April of 1984. And it was an article that was published about some of the stores, the locations that were uptown. Again, this is when Kramer's had moved uptown, but they were closing. I know our story's about downtown, but I really like this article because we have a first-hand account from Florence and her husband talking about the store, and you could really see their passion for, you know, owning this business, serving this community, how much they cared about this community. So I just wanted to share what was in this article. One of the reasons that these businesses had decided to close was because they had, at that time, originally started to install the parking meters uptown. And so they had, you know, some of the business owners were not happy with this. They had stated that it was, you know, discouraging the customers. And another reason was because Florence was starting to have some poor health. So they decided that they were going to, you know, sell the two-story brick building, that there was an apartment. It says that they had worked at that store for 35 years. And I'm just going to read the story right from the Morning Call with the Morris making his comments. We made this decision reluctantly because we've enjoyed being merchants. They said the Kramer Shoe Store has become known all over the northern Lehigh community and Walnutport area. And they have some very loyal customers that have come even as far as Allentown and Bethlehem to get the good fit that the Morris was so well known for. The motto for the store was, "Where feet are fitted," Morris stated. He stated, "We go beyond selling shoes." They had purchased American-made shoes, and they often sold them for less than department stores and managed to run a profitable business. I'll have Mike, you can show some of the different ads for the shoe sales. One of the things that he indicated is they never had x-rays machines like some of the stores did. He said those were a gimmick, and they were strictly dangerous. Instead, he had a tattered chart of osteology that showed every bone in the foot and the lower leg, which he had memorized. And he stated that, "Do you know that a foot actually has 4 arches? Do you know that in 90 out of every 100 people, one foot is larger than the other? Usually it's the left. I don't know why, but it is," Morris allowed. And the merchant, you know, he stated that the quality leather shoe will definitely stretch in width to accommodate the difference, but certainly not the length. Florence said that in the early days, Kramer's sold a popular Energetics brand of women's shoes for $5 to $6 a pair, and the men's floor seams, probably pronouncing that incorrectly, went for $10 a pair. She went on to say, "We have served generations of families in this area," and displaying a file box, she pulled out a bunch of cards indicating the children that were customers of the store. She had written down every style, size, and price of the shoes that were brought by them, and noted any type of foot problems that they would have had. Some of these children now bring their children to the Kramers for shoes. For years, the couple noted the birth dates of their young customers and faithfully mailed birthday cards to them. It was a thoughtful gesture that was appreciated, and the customers would write to them, and all the letters that were sent were saved. Pasted to the cash register were a dozen photos of children and toddlers who were brought to the shop by their parents. We specialize in quality shoes for children, and we are known for it, Morris remarked. He also remarked, when he visits large department stores, he's just appalled at the lack of knowledge displayed by the harried employees. Now again, we're talking in the 1980s when this article was written. They are just clerks. They ring up the sale and they take the money. They do not know how to fit people properly. They can't answer basic questions. They can't tell you how many bones there are in a foot. The merchant said he did not want anyone wearing a Kramer-sold shoe if it did not fit properly. It's bad for the customer and it's bad for the store's reputation, he stated. As a result, customers had to walk up and down his carpeted runner numerous times and answer an array of questions before Morris even agreed to sell them the shoes. When asked what was missing in the retail shoe business today, Morris paused and he stared gravely at his interview, and then he replied, "The personal touch, it doesn't exist anymore." Yes?
I've been misled.
We've been misled?
Okay? Like most of you out here, and the Kramers for a shoe. And I always thought that machine in the back where I stood and I looked at him was an X-ray machine. What did he call it?
He said he did not use an X-ray machine. He said those were a sham.
I used it a lot there and I get a kick out of it. Huh? Never saw it. That was in the back. I was too old for that already. He just fitted it, but we sent us home.
Maybe you were at another shoe store. You were at the sham shoe store.
They have that sliding thing that you put on the thing of it.
Yeah.
That's to measure your size. Size of your foot, yeah.
But they sold everything.
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
Yeah.
You used to come over, they're selling dresses, they're selling coats, they're selling hats, they're selling everything and anything.
When my mother and I would go into the shop with my sisters and brothers, on comes Mars. Oh, and Mr. Kramer goes, "Hello, Mrs. Gillis, you're looking great today," with a slip. Crack up. So a slip, too, not
Yep.
the shoes.
Yep. Yeah, it said in the early days.
Very friendly people.
Yeah.
You know, they were very friendly, you know.
Yeah.
And I do think you cared about the customers coming in there, you know, too.
Yeah.
It was comical to me as a little girl.
Okay, so the next business that I'm going to talk about is Martha's Hat Shop, and this was located at 258 Main Street. It was right at the corner of Main and Center Street. Martha B. Snyder was the proprietor from 1915 through 1979. Incredible to think that was 64 years. And she actually started there as an apprentice, in an apprenticeship in 1913 when she was, I believe, 16 years old. Because the shop was previously called Dorward's Millinery. What was really nice, again, you see Tim reaches out to people, he finds people. So he was able to locate a relative of Martha's, Miss Roberta McCoffey, who was her mother, Grace Sterner, was a sister to Martha. So she had sent a lovely testimonial about Martha, and she also has sent a really sweet poem that was written by Martha's uncle. So I'm just going to start off by reading this account that was given to me by, again, Martha's niece. Martha was born and raised in Bowmanstown, PA. At an early age, she showed an affinity for sewing and being quite creative with her skills, having learned to sew on a Singer treadle sewing machine. Her mother saw this and made arrangements for her to be an apprentice of Miss Dorward, who owned the hat shop. And again, this was when Martha was 16 years old. Martha would take a train from Bowmanstown to Walnutport and then walk across the bridge to the shop in Slatington. She did this trek 6 days a week until 1950. It's just incredible to think about. I don't know if any of you ever walked. I used to walk from Slatington to Burger King as a kid for work, and walking across that bridge is dreadful when it's windy and cold and everything else. So I just can't imagine, her doing that. She learned the skill of hat making or millinery because in the early 1900s, hats were made by ladies according to the purchaser, right? So these were custom made. You weren't buying a already made hat. So this is how she was taught. She learned how to make these customs hat. Later on, she did purchase hat, but she would go to Philadelphia and New York by train at least twice a year, and they would have long day workshops where she could learn how to make the flowers, the drape veiling, fold ribbons, add feathers, do all those kinds of things, and learn, of course, the new styles that were coming out. Again, this is a trend wear. You have to stay in top of the fashions. And she would adorn the basic hat with these items as ordered. At age 18 in 1915, that's when she became the owner of the hat shop. And again, as the styles changed, she continued to go to Philadelphia and New York. And she always made sure when she was there to go and see a play, because she really enjoyed seeing the musicals. She was always willing to adjust the style of the hat for the customers. For example, if they wanted more veiling or less flowers, she would change the hat for them. And she was a very good seamstress. For people that she knew, she would remodel clothes of all types, such as wedding dresses, fur coats, ladies' dresses, men's pants, etc. She was just a seamstress for all the needs. Eventually, she also sold handbags, gloves, scarves, and handkerchiefs. Every season, she would decorate her 2 Main Street windows with the theme of the season. Her store consisted of 2 rooms for the customer. One had 3 large tables with mannequin heads to display hats, a large mirror, and a comfy couch for the men to sit while the ladies shopped. The other rooms had more display area, a dressing table with a large mirror where the lady could sit and try on hats. Martha always catered to her customers and made them feel right at home. In the back room, that was her workshop. Again, she had her handy Singer featherweight sewing machine so that she could do just about anything that the customer wanted or asked for. She did have a nice collection of African violets in the little window in her shop windows back there, and she also had a nice little back garden where she loved to grow roses. She was a very personable lady who liked everyone she knew, and they all liked Martha. She had a great sense of humor, and she loved to cut it up with the people. She even had customers that came as far as from New Jersey and Philadelphia. The hat shop closed in May 30th, 1979 due to poor health. And I do see that she did pass in 1980. And again, I'm going to share this poem. Was written by her uncle, Will Snyder, in 1959. And what he said, I think this really sums her up. The title of the poem is Martha's Shop. As on Lower Main Street I strolled the other day, just sort of laughing or passing time away. I took the world for granted as I walked along the street, with not too much concern of things, till Martha's shop I meet. For there within the window, and as far as eyes could see, were ladies' fluffy toppers that almost startled me. I stopped and gazed in wonder as I came upon the scene, and I asked in sheer amazement, what does all this grandeur mean? So I pondered for a moment, then made up my mind with care, and then into the store I stepped to see if Martha's there. The sweetest smile you ever saw was perched on Martha's face. She told me she had just trimmed a hat with bric-a-brac and lace. She showed me to an easy chair, yes, the largest she could find, and said that this year most hats were with silk were lined. The counters, shelves, and table piled with feminine attire, such fluffy, frilly headgear that menfolk all admire. And seeing this, I said, "Well, Martha, how do you this problem face?" She said, "Oh, that's easy. For some I trim with ribbon and the others with lace." So pleasant was this imaginary visit to Martha's little store that someday when the sun is shining, I'll visit with her some more. And jolly little Martha, well, I thought you'd just like to know, for she's so dear to all of us, and we like her so. And again, that sums up my presentations on these two stores. I really hope that you enjoyed hearing about these two businesses. I mean, again, when I think about, you know, Martha being a young single woman as a business owner for over 60 years, it's just really incredible. Again, the Kramer family, you know, between the parents and then their daughter, many, many years, they've thrived in this community. So thank you again for coming. And we'll have Robert join us next. Almost took this away. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take a little detour off of Main Street now and talk about several businesses that were located on nearby Factory Street. And these were important to the early development of Slatington and its slate industry and history. One can argue that this area across Trout Creek on the southern side rivaled the area we spoke about during last year's business presentation, which was the area near Lehigh Valley Railroad Station, for industrial significance in Slatington around the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Can anyone guess why the street was called Factory Street? Wrong. No. Yes, because of the factories. And we cannot start our Factory Street tour without mentioning the year 1847 and the first school slate factory. I hope everyone has seen and read the Pennsylvania State Marker. I think next slide.